Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter.
So Chris, August already and National Allotments week in second week in August, isn't it?
It is, Peter, yes, and this year's theme is plotting for the future.
Okay.
The idea behind that theme is to basically look how allotments are trying to be more sustainable, and of course sustainability is so important in gardening these days, from the compost we use to the pots we use in our propagation units to how we source our plants and seeds.
And also the water, isn't it? Because I know on my allotment a lot of the greenhouses and sheds have got water butts and guttering to catch all the water. And it's so much easier from a laziness point of view if you've got a water butt on your allotment rather than have to trudge off up the lane to get your watering cans filled up. I know. I'm certainly jealous of those who've got the masses of water butts.
Indeed. And of course, in view of the summer we've had, it's been very variable in the amount of rain we've had. But of course, with vegetable crops and a lot of your fruit crops, the demand for moisture at certain times is high. Hence, the sustainability will also look at using obviously mulches on the plots too. So it's the whole area, which I think we can learn as gardeners that the allotment is do so many things so well, and they obviously lead by example.
Don't they just? So something I'd never heard of before is National Plum Day. Now that's another event that happens in August, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's quite specific to Pershore. It's their plum festival, and it happens throughout August. And of course, Pershore is well known for its soft fruit and top fruit growing. If you ever go down that part of the world, plums and cherries seem to take centre stage, as well as I think some of the Parmain pears too. They're quite well known for their wonderful orchards in that part of the world too.
Yeah, because the Vale of Evesham is a very nice area, and I remember having gone to Pershore College. You got sort of Breeden Hill just behind the college, and it was a real sort of good old valley and river running down the middle, and yeah, like you say, lots of fruit being grown down in that area.
And of course, a lot of market gardens. I mean, some of probably the best market gardens in the country can be found in that area. But I think the whole idea of the National Plum Day is just to bring awareness to this wonderful fruit, which of course has many guises. Although we sell at the garden centre plums, we also sell gauges and we sell damsons, which are basically different sized plums,
yeah. Definitely. I remember as a child, I think my elder brother tried feeding me some damsons once upon a time.
Okay.
Told me they were lovely, juicy, ripe, fresh plums, and would I like one? And they were so sour.
Yeah, I would say that probably didn't end well, Peter.
No, but I think my parents enjoyed making wine out of them.
Of course.
They're definitely a good fruit wine to crop from, aren't they?
And certainly, Plum Victoria, it's synonymous for gardeners for being so reliable and easy, and it's one of the few fruit trees which you can fan train against a north-facing wall, which for a lot of people, if they've got a predicament, what can I grow on a very shady wall? Well, pear trees might survive, but certainly Victoria Plum tend to do really well. So
I never knew that. And do they crop well on a north-facing wall?
Reasonably well. Obviously, the more sun they get, they will do better, but for the ripening of wood, but they will tolerate those sort of conditions. So it just shows you how a stole-hardy variety it is. And of course, it's self-fertile, so you don't have to worry about pollinators. So if you've only got space for one plum tree, make it a Victoria.
Excellent. Good suggestion there, Chris. Thank you. I suppose the other thing with plums is it tends to be when they're out that time of year, there's also a lot of wasps out.
Oh, Lord.
They're always flying around, buzzing and eating the fruit, aren't they?
They are indeed. And indeed, I think your message, on a podcast ago, Peter, about not flapping your hands around bees. Well, I'm afraid when it comes to wasps, I think that advice goes straight out of the window, because wasps and me tend not to go well together.
Yeah, they are in pain, aren't they? So when you're outside having a cup of tea and a bit of cake, straight to the cake they go.
Indeed.
They've got a good sense of smell. And for something that we've been selling here for a few years now, the garden centre, is a Waspinator, which when I first saw it, load of rubbish. But actually, they do work. They're quite good. They're just a sort of a fake nest, aren't they? Or a model nest. I don't know what you call them.
Yes.
Quite fun. You stick one of those underneath your parasol.
Yeah.
And they do seem to keep the wasps away. But
yeah, when I saw it, Peter, I thought it was something from one of the props from a sci-fi movie. To be honest with you, because it is so surreal to look at. However, I personally prefer the obviously the sort of the glass jars, which you obviously top up with some nice sugary substances to attract wasps that way. They look a little bit more decorative, and certainly, I mean, I think over the last 10, 15 years we've been selling them at the garden centre here. They continue to be popular. So
they sell very well and they work very well, like you say. Sort of put one of those on your table, and it's instead of the wasps going to your cake, hopefully they go to the wasp trap and get rid of them that way.
A very attractive decoy, I would say.
Definitely. So talking about tea and cake, Chris, something we learnt recently here was the difference between high tea and afternoon tea. Can you tell us what the difference is?
Yeah, well, it's going back a little bit in time, actually, going to the 1840s, when basically the gap between, obviously, breakfast, lunch, and then supper provided an opportunity to create a meal, and that meal became effectively high tea or afternoon tea. The high tea gets its influence from the fact that if you were having high tea and you were in well-to-do circles, you would be on proper chairs and tables, so you'd be elevated.
So the afternoon tea is for the lazy ones like me who like slouching around on the sofa.
I think most of us like to do that, yes. But if you're feeling a bit refined, so if you're going out, if you go to a National Trust property or to your garden centre who do afternoon teas, you're definitely having high tea.
High tea at the table.
Indeed.
Excellent. That's brilliant. And it's afternoon tea week, isn't it, soon?
It is, between August the 10th and August the 15th. And it's a UK event to promote, if we need to promote such a wonderful exuberance during the summer, and to bring the whole idea of actually enjoying time around the table at that time of the day. And of course, high teas, afternoon teas are very celebrationary now. Certainly at the garden centre here, we tend to have people coming in to use them as a real great opportunity to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries.
Well, it's a lovely treat, isn't it? I mean, obviously we make our own scones here, and I can think of nothing better than a nice homemade scone and some cream and some strawberry jam and a nice pot of strong tea. That's my idea of heaven.
Indeed, and obviously those are quintessential little English sandwiches which we put together, which is, of course, is all part of the process. But it's interesting. I mean, I think the popularity and the fact that these days it is being offered now in such so many different formats, isn't it? I think you can even get takeaway afternoon teas as well.
Yes, afternoon teas with prosecco, of course.
Of course, yes.
They're very rich amongst us. But
yeah,
but yeah. So I mean, there's also the other argument about which way to put your cream and jam, isn't there? And the Cornish and the...
Yes. So which way do you take your afternoon tea?
Honestly, I put the jam on first and then the cream, just because I find it easier to spread it that way.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yes.
I don't know if that's the correct way or whether because the Cornish like to split theirs in half and then put the jam on and then the cream. So
that's following your format.
I'm following the Cornish tradition now.
Yeah, indeed. So and if you want to be the opposite, then obviously you would put the cream on first, which I suppose depends on the consistency of the cream, but certainly getting the jam on there to stay on, especially if you've got those pesky wasps around you, might be a bit more of a problem. But
well, maybe they're more cultured in Devon and they can do things more in a more refined way.
I'm sure they are. Yes.
Excellent. So with the cold spring this year and everything being so late, Chris, obviously harvesting normally around this time of year, are things like the sweet corns that I planted so late really going to be worth harvesting, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would that obviously we're into some better spell of weather now. We're into August, so that should help them. Remember, things like sweet corn tend to produce the amount of growth quite quickly. The whole plant's geared up to produce a crop within usually 8 to 12 weeks of planting.
Yep.
I noticed, recently on some of the TV programs, a lot of the crops are going in, somewhat later than normal. So I think we have to be diligent as gardeners to watch the weather and work with the weather. So perhaps this is a perfect example, a year really where we've had to sort of do that quite noticeably. Shift
things around a bit. Because potatoes are obviously in flower. My Desiree are looking okay. They're not massive this year, but we're looking forward to digging them up. And what other sort of crops should we be thinking about at the moment?
Yeah, so certainly when it comes to potatoes, yes, usually you wait until you're well into flower, or when the plant's leaves start to go a bit yellow. That's usually an indication. I have to say we've had a few reports around the area where obviously the garden is in Buckingham have a little bit of blight.
Yep.
So be wary of that. So if you get any blight on your potatoes, if you start to see sort of spotting on your leaves, and yellowing of leaves, and the leaves sort of becoming very withered, then get those potatoes lifted as soon as you can to try and salvage the tubers before they get infected by the fungal disease. That's quite important.
Because I can remember listening to our potato expert in the podcast, one of the first ones we did, all about that, and the fact that the blight runs down in the stems of the potatoes and then infects the crop below. So like you say, sort of if you do see any blight, whip it off and dig up your potatoes if you can. Yeah,
and most definitely make a note of that, and certainly when you're sourcing your seed potatoes come next January, February, go for the blight-resistant varieties, which there are plenty out there, and you just need searching out to get yourself into that, hopefully that resistant mode. And of course, we haven't got any fungicides on the market now to protect from blight, which is such a shame, which we could do sort of previously. The other thing, obviously, you might want to start thinking about, of course, is your onions, your garlic, and your shallots, if you like growing those. When I used to grow onions on my plot, once we got into the latter end of July, early August, when the plants started to show some signs of stress and the bulbs were forming quite nicely, I would normally go along with a fork and just carefully lift the bulbs, just lift them enough to separate them from the roots, and then flop the tops of the plants over to the left or right, keeping them nice and tidy on the plot, and that would then start to encourage the bulbs to ripen. So you're removing the moisture content, the moisture potential by the roots being snapped effectively, and then the air can then get round the bulb, and that can slowly but surely ripen the bulb before being fully lifted and harvested.
Okay. So, Chris, I bought a new toy a few years ago, the Hozelock Growbag Waterer, and I've actually had some success finally at growing my tomatoes, because historically I think they used to dry out, and I grow them on a sort of patio, and it's a lovely sun trap south-facing, and I think they used to... The first time I did it, they all dried out and it didn't do very well. Whereas with this gadget or trough, I don't know what you call it, a grow bag waterer, it's a really good little invention, isn't it?
It has, and it's got quite a reserve of moisture in it as well. It's got quite a tank, isn't it? So
you sort of fill it up with water every couple of days, and I generally put a bit of tomerite in there as well.
Perfect.
And it seems the tomatoes are just... drink so much, don't they? It's incredible. You think, well, there must be a good, I would say 5 gallons possibly in the bottom of one of those.
Certainly it holds a lot, and with those wicks, obviously it hacks through the capillarity into your cropping bag, your grow bag as well, which is really good piece, because obviously the biggest problem a lot of people have at this time of year is their fruits sort of splitting or becoming affected by a phenomenon called blossom end rot. So it's interesting, because when I was at college, we were always taught, like you're at college, that when your fruits of your tomatoes you get these sort of black sunken areas, and obviously as the ripening fruit is developing, those black sunken areas look quite disgusting.
Yeah, they don't look good, do they?
They don't, no. That it was all to do with the watering, that it was part and parcel of it. But the idea is, if your plant is dry, if you come back from a holiday, a week away, and you've had somebody looking after your tomatoes, faithfully watering them, but unfortunately they've missed a water and the plants have dried out, what normally happens is, technically, the plant will take moisture from the tips of the plant to support the plant? Well, in fact, it works in the reverse. The moisture is taken from the fruits, and the fruits then support the growing tip, so the plant can continue to grow.
Okay.
Well, that's what that was the folklore surrounding it.
Yep.
And that's now not to be true, because that in itself will not cause the blossom end rot. What causes a blossom end rot in most tomatoes is a lack of calcium.
Okay, so we're not likely to suffer it around here if we use our finest tap water, are we?
I was going to say.
I guess if you're using rainwater from the water butt, yeah, it's probably worth thinking about. I mean, is it something that we need to think about if we're using a tomato fertilizer, or are the decent ones already got all the minerals as well as the fertilizers in them?
Yeah, I think if you stick to your tried and tested Tomerite or your Doff tomato feed, or if you convert it to using sort of Phostrogen on a lot of your crops, then it's got plenty of potassium in there and a lot of calcium.
Excellent.
In sufficient quantities. But it's interesting, the plants grow at such a pace, or maybe not as much this year because of the weather conditions we've experienced, but they are putting on lots of growth everywhere. I mean, obviously de-side shooting, taking those side shoots out of your plants is obviously a priority. If you're growing them on as a cordon, so if you're growing them up a single stem,
yep,
and you're encouraging those trusses to develop, it is important you take those trusses out. And the other thing, of course, is the big dilemma: when do you take the growing tip out? When do you have this leap of faith that the trusses you've got so far are going to be sufficient to carry the fruits you're producing? So generally, I always say, let them get to 5 flowers of nice trusses of flower, of developing flower, and fingers crossed we get a decent autumn, and those then will develop into fruits.
Excellent. Okay, thanks for that, Chris. So thinking about sitting out in the garden a bit more and eating your crops, and one of the things that I mentioned a while ago was the broad bean dip that I love making. So such a simple recipe, isn't it, Chris? I think you got to try some earlier. I
did, and very nice it was too. I have to say, I like my hummus, and I like anything sort of dippy which is not too spicy. This sits very comfortably on my palate. So
yeah, it's such an easy one to make as well. I mean, it's literally, I think, 250, 300 grams of broad beans, boil them up, and then just leave a tiny bit of water in the bottom of the pan, maybe sort of 2-3 millimeters, depends on how big your pan is, I suppose, but a little bit of water, and then chuck in some olive oil, so a couple of spoonfuls of olive oil, and some nice rosemary from the garden, and then sort of 3 or 4 cloves of garlic, depends obviously how big the garlic is, and so all things that we can really easily grow in this country. And then once you've put all the ingredients in the saucepan, blend them up with the, I don't know what the technical term is, blender, zhuzh, and until it goes into a nice sort of, you don't want it too smooth, but a sort of like hummus consistency, or a sort of a nice dipping consistency, and then off you go. Stick it on some toast or pita bread, and or just use breadsticks and dip away.
Yeah, great. I would say a great accompaniment to your barbecue or your summer salads,
and a healthy dip as well. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, that's a nice one, Peter. And I think more recipes we can glean from our garden, and by necessity have a look at the ingredients you're growing, and then work backwards, because obviously a lot of these things can be created quite easily, and they can just add to the whole experience of enjoying our gardens to the full through the months of summer, and especially this month.
Definitely. So, with it now being August, Chris, have we still got time to put some more lettuce in, do you think?
Most definitely, yes. I mean, I've been pulling lettuce quite regularly, actually, and it's interesting with lettuce, you only need a small amount of seedlings coming along in your greenhouse or on your windowsill to fill those gaps, and certainly I tend to go for lollo rosso.
Okay.
I use it a lot in my sandwiches and things. I think it's just such an easy, it's a very open-leafed variety, and of course you get it in nice bright bronze and green colours, so it looks quite attractive. In fact, I've seen some lovely lollo rosso growing in people's gardens in mixed borders, which is often, you have to do a double take, but why not grow your salads amongst your perennials on your bedding plants?
Well, we certainly do with the cabbages as well, don't we? And,
We do.
You so often see those in bedding displays.
That's right. So, as far as seed sowing now, as I say, we're talking about lettuce, but certainly radish. You can certainly get another 2 or 3 sowings of those in over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
The variety, obviously, French breakfast, or in this case, I've got a nice packet of Sparkler 3, which I'm not familiar with, but it's a very nice round, quite a mild, crisp variety. So that'll take us well into October for harvesting. So it will give you a nice sort of stretch of three months or so of harvest time. To follow that for your salads, then obviously some more spring onions, but this is the winter Lisbon hardy spring onion, effectively.
Okay.
So this will sit over the winter months, and you'll be harvesting this much earlier than your traditional spring onions you sow in March under cloches.
Right.
So you're going to get a head start on your plot as well. So if you've got raised beds, if you've got large pots, if you're growing some things on the patio, then a few white Lisbon will do the trick for those. And then if you're wanting some brassicas, mainly cabbage, then obviously spring cabbage.
Yep.
Lots of those on the market. Obviously Durham's early. The one I picked up from Johnson Seeds is Offenham 2, which in brackets is Flower of Spring, which I think is a great name for a vegetable, isn't it?
Yeah,
for a variety. And it's your typical sort of pointed cabbage. So you could grow it as a proper cabbage, or as spring greens, as a lot of us like to enjoy our cabbages that way. And last but not least, and I think it's a variety you've mentioned, Peter, is Chard. Chard Bright Lights, which again, if you've got limited space for growing veg and you want to introduce it into your garden, this would look very nice in ornamental beds as well. With
It is so colourful. I think it's growing wild on my allotment because it seems to be sprouting up everywhere. And
Great.
We've also got some wild parsnips that my mother had to identify for me. But they've got lovely yellow flowers, the parsnips.
Yeah, the whole carrot family have wonderful, wonderful flowers, don't they? Cucuses, yes.
Excellent. So, and Pak Choi, that's the other one you can plant this time of year.
You can, yeah. You've got a good few weeks of that. And again, make sure you're going into well-improved soil. Make sure there's no weed growth around when you're sowing. And obviously give the soil a bit of a drink as we'll be into some dry weather now, just to get the germination through. And be patient. If you are sowing varieties which are quite slow, historically on your plot, then a good little tip, I always get a little bit of mustard or cress seed and mix that in with the seed I'm sowing to define where I'm sowing it. So that'll come up really quickly. It'll obviously come to nothing, but at least it'll identify where you've sown.
You can see where your rows of seeds are. That's a really good tip.
Yeah, I use that for my parsnip when I used to grow parsnips, because of course they're notoriously slow, as is parsley. So if you're growing anything which is really tricky, mustard or cress.
And then you don't weed it out.
Exactly.
So I think probably my favourite fruit that we can grow fairly easily in this country is strawberry.
Oh, yes.
And the season's over now for the cropping of them, isn't it? But we now need to start thinking about propagation, don't we?
Yes, because straight after your crop of strawberries, you usually find the plant is very obliging and sends out lots of shoots, which we affectionately call runners.
Yep.
And then these runners basically will become new plants. They will produce a long shoot, and at the end you'll have a little embryonic strawberry plant, genetically identical to the variety it's obviously come from.
Yep.
And you can either, traditionally you would get some nice little pots, some 9 centimetre, 3.5 inch pots, nice gritty compost or a nice peat-free compost, and you'd peg down these little young plants into the compost, and often you'd sort of plunge those, if you've got your strawberries in a bed, you'd just sort of plunge those into the soil so they're at the same sort of level. You do need to keep that compost in those pots nice and moist, which can be tricky when you've plunged it into the soil. So sort of bear that in mind. What I tend to do, I'm a bit of a cheat here, I'll actually let my plants naturally root into the soil around.
Yep.
And then usually... Yeah, and that's it. In October, I'll go along, get a pair of secateurs and snip, because the plant will still be attached to the mother plant.
Yep.
Go along, snip off those, pot them up, and then overwinter. And then I'll have perfectly good 1-year-old plants, which I will probably get a small crop from in the following spring, following sort of May, June time from planting.
Okay, because what's the lifespan of your standard strawberry plants if you just without taking the runners off it?
Yeah, I think it's around about 4 to 5 years. They start to run out of steam quite quickly because obviously they're growing in the same area.
Yep.
And that's the thing with strawberries, you do need to almost rotate them round your plot. So
Okay.
if you've got the space or you're growing them in sort of raised beds, I've got 2 raised beds of strawberries, and I think probably next year one of them will be coming to an end. I'll need to basically give it a year's rest, the soil, maybe grow some, maybe my tomato plants will go in there where I can improve the soil, and then the following year the runners I've produced from my other bed can go into there to keep the continuity going. I think it's quite important. But yeah, when you buy your strawberries, I mean, we do root wrap strawberries and we do potted strawberries. They're always from a certified source, so always make sure you get them from a good ministry source, so they're clean of virus. Most strawberries, actually, a bit like the potatoes, are grown up north, up in Scotland.
Okay.
There isn't the green fly. Of course, green fly is the vector of a lot of virus diseases. So always make sure when you're buying your strawberries that they are certified stock. It's quite important, and that means you'll be starting off with the best plants to give you that 4 or 5 years of good cropping.
And like you say, so if you can take the runners off, you can keep them going sort of ad infinitum.
Yeah, and the other thing, Peter, that is something I've been playing around with this year, is growing alpine strawberries.
Okay, yeah.
Because you grow those from seed,
Yep.
so they're good. And they're so easy to grow. I've planted 4 or 5 dotted around the garden, and they've continued to crop well into July. So you can actually obviously enjoy those fruits. You're not going to get punnets of fruit, but you get
because the fruit's very small, isn't it? It's a sort of large garden pea.
It is
broad bean sort of size, and but very. Some of them were really nice. I can remember as a child, sort of they were scattered around the garden, and you used to go and hunt the strawberry plant. And the little alpine strawberries are a lovely little treat.
But the flavour, as they say, is to savour, because it's really sweet. And it's got I don't know, it's obviously the origins of the strawberries we grow now commercially. So it's got a lot of the genetics of those. But I just find it such an intense flavour.
Very good, thank you. So in our last show, Chris, we talked about roses, and I learnt a new term, which is budding. Obviously, that's part of propagation. But have you managed to watch the video on Whartons?
Most definitely, yes. Fascinating and, I mean, beautifully put together. And it doesn't explain how roses now get to the garden centre. I don't know what would.
It's really interesting, and it obviously shows you so much how long a process it is. I'd not really realised until I watched the video just sort of how much energy and effort goes into all of the preparation and the length of time, and it's a really good little video, that.
It is, yeah. And also it shows the numbers, doesn't it? The number of varieties they grow. And of course, if we're all familiar this spring with the wonderful scenes of daffodil and tulips in Holland and Lincolnshire, well, you get such a fantastic effect from the air of roses as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, it was a really good video. I'm really pleased to have watched that. And just thinking sort of cuttings, and it's about the right time of year now to take softwood cuttings, isn't it?
It is, yes. One of my favourite times of the year. I just love going out with me sharp knife and me plastic bag in the morning, preferably, to do good cuttings. But yeah, there's so many plants. I mean, a lot of our listeners no doubt will grow lots of tender perennials, and obviously lots of the bedding plants, such as something like agryanthemums and osteospermums, penstemons, and obviously our popular pelargoniums, as well as obviously a lot of popular shrubs. I mean, I'm thinking of hydrangeas. Hydrangeas are synonymous at this time of year for producing all those wonderful flowers, but of course they're producing these non-woody shoots now, which just say to me, take me as a cutting.
Yeah.
It's plants for free, and I think as gardeners, and as obviously working in the garden centre trade, I think it's great that we can, encourage people to take cuttings, because it is so easy.
And it's fun as well, isn't it? It's always sort of enjoyable to see. I know historically, as a young boy, I learned to do it with Tim, our old nursery manager, and sometimes they don't take, sometimes they do, but it's always exciting to see sort of how many do take, and then you've got a whole new plant coming along.
It is, yeah, and especially these days, Peter, with the amount of plant material which we're growing, quite a lot of it is tender. We're being, nicely succumbed into these wonderful flowers. I mean, things like salvias, the herbaceous salvias are fantastic, and they're so good in all sorts of summers, especially this summer they're doing really well. But they just need to be taken as cuttings just as an insurance policy, just in case we get another very severe and cold winter, which would obviously kill your plants off. So I always tend to think of softwood cuttings as your insurance policy on your plants. So, as I say, try and get out there in the morning, get yourself a nice sharp knife, and really go along and take your cuttings. Softwood cuttings generally are usually sort of 2 or 3 inches long, and you cut them just below a leaf joint, and you obviously remove those lower leaves. And obviously you can prepare your cuttings when you get inside your greenhouse or your shed or on the kitchen table, but make sure you have a plastic bag and put them in there so they don't lose moisture, because as soon as you take a cutting, effectively it starts to transpire, it tends to lose water. So the fresher you can keep the plant before you actually then put it into the compost, the better.
Excellent. And with the cuttings, Chris, I know when we used to do geraniums, when I was, like I said, when I was a boy, we used to use, I think it used to be called rooting hormone, rooting gel, and now there's sort of rooting powder and powders and gels, aren't there? They've changed a little bit, haven't they? But
I think they've gone down the obviously the organic route, or the more less sort of pretentious use of auxins. They seem to have gone out of favour, which is a shame, because the 2 auxins used in a lot of the products of yesteryear, and which perhaps the commercial people may use, are based on obviously the auxins from willow, from the good old salix.
Yep. Because that's a really easy plant to propagate, isn't it? You don't even need any rooting gel on that. You just get a willow twig and stick it in a bucket of water, and off you go.
That's it. So there's a clue there, isn't it? How successful they are. But I suppose for some plants they are essential. For others, it's probably less so. But I think the most important thing is, you prepare the cutting, you get it back to the bench, and then you get yourself some good compost. Now, you can buy obviously seed and cutting composts on the market. You can obviously buy a peat-free version of those as well, or you could go down the route which I tend to do. Is I tend to, if I'm doing lots of cuttings, I tend to mix my own mix, which is now 50-50 peat-free multi-purpose compost, and I'm using the Hue Horizon because I'm finding that's quite easy to work with. And then I'll mix either perlite or vermiculite.
Okay.
So there's 2
that
options.
lightens the soil up a bit, doesn't it, and improves the drainage?
Correct, yes. Now, the drainage is a bit of an issue because, of course, we know with our peat-free compost, the drainage on them is usually very good as well. So it's getting a bit of a balancing act with the amount you put in there. Hence, that's why putting vermiculite might work a little bit better, because that's slightly smaller volcanic bits of granule, which obviously tends to fill in the gaps within your compost. But basically, it keeps the air and oxygen into your compost, which of course is essential for roots to develop. But it's just getting this management of the watering right. And of course, that's what we're all experiencing at the moment with these new composts, how to water them correctly. So just you need to be a little bit careful on that. But once you've done that, pop your cuttings in. Remember to use a little dibber or a HB pencil to make your hole. So because obviously if you're using your rooting products, you don't want to be removing those as you push the cutting in, and then you can put them into a propagator, or what I use, call me unconventional, I use sort of the milky white polythene bags you get from the butchers, and I use that to put over the top of my pot, get a couple of elastic bands to hold it in, and I leave that on then, and every morning I will take the plastic bag off, get rid of the condensation, either leave it to dry or turn it inside out, and pop it back onto the pot, keep the compost just moist, not too wet, and then fingers crossed, things will start to root probably after 2 to 3 weeks if I'm lucky, probably 5 to 6 if I'm not so lucky.
Okay, because I suppose the white opaque plastic bag, if I'm imagining this correctly, it gives you some shading and cuts the direct sunlight down, but still lets all the light through. So a bit like sort of greenhouse shading in your greenhouse.
Spot on, Peter. That's exactly the reason I use it. And the trouble is, if you use an ordinary polythene bag, yes, you can scorch your cuttings, especially on a sunny windowsill or in your greenhouse, and that's the last thing you want to do for your poor little plants as they're developed or trying to develop a root system.
Great. So in a previous podcast, Chris, we were talking about sort of big gardens and the Windsor Great Park.
Yes.
And I saw on the news the other day that Buckingham Palace Gardens are opening up again for the summer.
They are indeed. Yes, obviously they took a break last year because of COVID, but the garden centre went out a couple of times with a couple of groups actually to the gardens and to the state rooms, and it was a good day. But the gardens themselves are amazing. They're really interesting, and you do feel as though you're going back in time in every sense of the word. Yeah, I mean it's a total of 39 acres. So when you always see pictures of Buckingham Palace, those aerial shots, you don't realise that 39 acres.
That's quite a big old area, isn't it?
Yeah, I think quite a lot of that is the lake, because it's a huge lake on
right
there. Yeah, and a few facts there. They've did one of these censuses. 325 wild plant species have been counted there.
Yeah.
30 species of breeding birds.
Okay.
And over 1,000 trees, which of course we know there's lots of plane trees there. The 2 plane trees, when you go on the tour, as you walk down, are affectionately called Victoria and Albert. Excellent. On either side, and they're over 150 years old. So you get a sense of stately presences there. And of course, there's over 85 species of oak trees, and of course, there's lots of mulberry trees, because the Buckingham Palace Gardens actually holds the national collection of mulberry.
Yep.
Which when I went, I was absolutely gobsmacked. So there's such a lot of diverse nature in just one area, and in central London as well.
Yeah. It certainly is. It always looks very well kept as well. There must be a few royal gardeners, I should imagine.
I would have thought so. And yeah, the other sort of highlight when you go around the gardens, which I really strongly recommend, they're going to be open. Obviously, they're open now through to the 19th of September. But you do get to see the tennis courts, which obviously was played by famously by the Royals.
Yep.
And also Fred Perry played there. Okay. And I also read that even Bjorn Borg and John McEnroe, as Wimbledon has now come and gone, but they actually played there as well. So in every sense, it's a very special place. But I think one of the most noticeable things when we were walking around with the group, and you're taken by a really good tour leader who obviously points out special plants of interest. They had a conker tree, one of the horse chestnuts, which was suffering from this what they call bleeding canker, which is this nasty disease, and the Queen had commissioned some sort of latest research on trying to keep this tree alive, because it was over 200 years old.
Wow.
And it had things plugged into it, drips and all sorts of sort of very mechanical methods of trying to get this tree alive. So it just shows that horticulture is very important in the royal household.
Very interesting. So if any of you are fortunate enough to go and have a look around the Royal Gardens, please put a hashtag Royal Dig It.
Royal Dig It, that sounds good, doesn't it? We'll see those across. Just a point of interest, Peter, you're not allowed to take photographs there, so you'll have to obviously hold back on your social media until you get outside. As soon as you get outside the sort of gates, there are opportunities to take photographs back in over the wonderful lake to Buckingham Palace. That's where I took all my photos. So there's opportunities there, but yeah.
Can't take your drone along either, I should imagine.
I don't think so. No, it would upset the corgis.
Yeah, definitely. So the National Garden Scheme, Chris, I know historically in the garden centre counters we used to have like the Buckinghamshire Yellow Book, all the different yellow books from around these areas. And is that still printed, the Yellow Book, or is it all digital now?
Yeah, no, the Yellow Book is still printed. I think it has gone online more, but I have noticed we have got some of those famous Yellow Books in the shop now, which is great. And of course, most of your local garden centres to your area will have the NGS books for that area to have a scrutinise and identify those gardens close to you which are open.
Yeah, because I was very fortunate. But in my streets, I think there was about 4 gardens that were opened up, and one of them had some little baby hedgehogs that were being cared for in the garden, and I'd never seen them. They were feeding these tiny little hedgehogs with syringes, and they're so cute. They're only, I'd say, 2-3 inches long, and just really, really cute little mini hedgehogs, and lovely to see. So always something different to go and have a look at and get inspired when you do go around the gardens, aren't there?
And I was going to say, Peter, you were saying that that particular garden was jam-packed with plants.
I don't think I've ever seen so many different cacti in a garden. A gentleman who owns the house had 3 greenhouses, and he'd been collecting cacti for the last 50-odd years and had literally hundreds of different cacti and different varieties. And so nice to see some of them in flower as well, because obviously cacti don't flower that often. And
Indeed.
I think there's a good half a dozen or so that were in flower. But yeah, the garden was immaculate, but equally jam-packed, full of hundreds of different little species of plant. I'd never seen so many, such a diverse collection of plants, I think, and very interesting to see how they'd managed to get them all to grow alongside one another, and obviously thought a lot about sort of the size of the plants and how big they're going to go and what conditions they needed, and given them the right conditions, and really interesting. Yeah,
certainly the NGS is to be well supported, and it's in a lot of people's hearts these days, because obviously I think the money goes to one of the cancer charities, and I think they donate an awful lot of money, which is just fantastic. So, as we were talking about cream teas earlier, a lot of them offer cream tea refreshments as well, which is obviously a nice money earner for the charities as well.
Yeah, because you often find that sort of gardeners are also selling cuttings and little plants that they've propagated, and I know one of the ones I saw my mother would have loved, because there's about 5 different varieties of aeonium that he was
very
selling.
Nice.
So yeah, well worth a visit, and relatively cheap. I think we paid £5 to visit. Well, we could have visited about a dozen different gardens.
Fantastic value for money.
All within walking distance of each other, which is great, and very good value for money. So yeah, very interesting. So our next show in a couple of weeks' time, Chris, what's that going to be about?
Right, so we're going to be joined by Ed Turpin from BBONT, which stands for Berkshire, Buckingham and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust.
Excellent.
So it's one of the local trusts to where we are in Buckingham here, but of course the Wild Trust, as many of our listeners will know, is countrywide across the UK, and we're going to be chatting to a whole series of subjects which we feel that we want to try and link into what's happening to our wildlife at the moment, including obviously the whole areas of conservation. So yes, we're going to be priming with lots of questions, and we hope to have a really good show to present in a few weeks' time.
Excellent. That sounds like fun. Well, thank you very much for the show today, Chris.
Thank you, Peter. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives, from parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.